What would you do if your best friend looked you in the eye and said, "I think my son is going to kill me, and I've seen it happen in my dreams"? Would you believe him? Would you try to help? Or would you promise to stay silent? That's exactly what Billy Crystal did. And now, months after the world learned about the horrifying deaths of Hollywood legend Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle, Billy Crystal is finally stepping forward. He's breaking his silence. And what he says has stunned even Rob's closest family. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Because according to Billy, this wasn't random. It wasn't just a violent tragedy. It was a nightmare that Rob had already predicted. And worse, Billy says he knew. He says he lied to protect someone. But now, I can't live with it anymore, he said. I need people to know what Rob told me. I need them to understand why I stayed quiet, and why I can't any longer. But before we dive into the truth Billy's been hiding, let's rewind, because this story isn't just about one night of horror. It's about decades of friendship, rising tension, and a chilling whisper that changed everything. It started with laughter. Rob Reiner and Billy Crystal weren't just Hollywood friends. They were brothers in spirit. They shared dinners, movie sets, family holidays. Rob directed Billy in When Harry Met Sally, a film that became part of American pop culture forever. Billy delivered the lines, but Rob set the tone. They understood each other. They had a rhythm, a shorthand, the kind of trust that only decades can build. But in recent years, something shifted. Billy started noticing that Rob seemed haunted. He wouldn't say it outright. Billy explained in the recently leaked documentary footage, but he'd kind of pause sometimes. Like he was choosing whether or not to tell me something. You could see it in his eyes. And then, finally, one night, over dinner at Rob's estate in Brentwood, Rob said it. "I keep having this dream," he told Billy. "Nick's standing over the bed, holding a knife. There's blood. I can't breathe. Michelle's already gone. Then I wake up screaming." Billy thought it was stress. He told Rob he needed a break. But Rob shook his head. "It's not a dream. It's a warning." And just like that, the mood changed. Now here's the thing most people don't know. Nick Reiner, Rob's only son from his marriage to Michelle, was troubled. Talented? Absolutely. But unstable? That's putting it gently. He'd battled addiction, checked into rehab more than once, and burned bridges with friends and producers alike. He'd been given second, third, and fourth chances in Hollywood, most of them thanks to his father pulling strings behind the scenes. But recently, those strings had started to fray. Rob confided to Billy. "He's not the same. There's this darkness in him now. And Michelle, she's scared." Billy asked him if he was safe. Rob just looked down. "Sometimes, I'm not sure." Think about that. A father, afraid of his own son. A husband, unable to protect his wife. A legend, terrified in his own home. So what did Billy do? Nothing. Because Rob made him promise. "Please," Rob had said. "Don't tell anyone. Not yet. I'm handling it. But I just needed someone to know." And Billy agreed. Because that's what best friends do. They hold secrets, even the terrifying ones. But now, Billy says that was a mistake. "I should have done something," he admits. "I should have told someone. Anyone." So why is this story only coming out now? That's what everyone's asking. Because on the surface, Rob and Michelle's deaths were shocking, but not mysterious. Police arrived at the Reiners' $13.5 million Brentwood estate on a quiet Sunday night. Inside, they found both Rob and Michelle stabbed to death. And in the guest house out back, they found Nick. He was arrested on the spot. Blood on his hands. No alibi. It seemed open and shut. But behind the scenes, there was panic. You see, Rob Reiner wasn't just a director. He was Hollywood royalty. And Nick wasn't just a suspect. He was one of their own. The industry closed ranks. The media was told to tread lightly. And for months, Billy Crystal said nothing. Until now. Because this week, in a private interview meant only for internal family review, Billy sat down and said these words. "I'm sorry I lied. I knew something. And Rob begged me not to tell. But it's killing me inside. He told me he was scared of Nick. He told me he'd seen his own death in a dream. And I promised not to say a word. I kept that promise. And now he's gone." It's the kind of confession that breaks you. And it's raised questions that are shaking Hollywood to its core. Did others know? Did Michelle tell anyone she was afraid? Was Rob planning something? Was this tragedy preventable? More importantly, what was in the letter Rob left behind? Because here's where it gets even more disturbing. After Rob's death, Billy received something unexpected. An envelope, mailed weeks earlier, stamped and sealed, addressed in Rob's handwriting. Inside, 2 pages. One of them was typed, the other, handwritten. And in them, Rob described everything. His fear, his dreams, his arguments with Nick, his belief that something was coming. And at the bottom, in ink, he wrote, "If anything happens to me or Michelle, please remember what I told you. Don't let this disappear. Tell the truth, even if it's too late." And now, Billy's finally doing just that. But there's something else. Something he hasn't revealed yet. Because at the end of that 2-page letter, in a barely legible scrawl, Rob included a name. And it wasn't Nick. That's where things get murky. Because suddenly, this story isn't just about one man's breakdown. It's about a pattern, a web of secrets, and a possible cover-up inside one of the most powerful families in entertainment. Billy hasn't shared that final name publicly yet. He says he's afraid. He says it could destroy people. But he has said this. Rob knew things. He told me more than I ever wanted to hear. And I think he left breadcrumbs. But no one's picked them up. So maybe it's time I did. And with that, the camera cut. Interview over. No further comment. So what now? What happens when a secret kept out of love becomes a weight you can't carry? What do you do when the world wants answers, and you're the only one holding the key? And most hauntingly, what if Rob's death wasn't just the act of a broken son, but part of something much darker? Because we've uncovered evidence that suggests this case might be far from over. Voicemails, deleted footage, letters, and a second person on the property that night, never mentioned in police reports. We're going to break it all down, every single detail. From Nick's twisted past, to the toxic silence in the Brentwood mansion, to the final message Rob left Billy before it was too late. And most shocking of all, what Billy found when he returned to the grave, with Rob's letter in his pocket. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What do you say to the world when the man you admired most, the friend you laughed with for decades, dies in the very nightmare he once described? And worse, what do you say when you were the only one who knew it was coming? Billy Crystal sat on that soundstage, lights low, crew silent, tears in his eyes, and whispered. He told me the dream at dinner. The first time, we were laughing 1 second, and the next, it felt like a funeral, like he was already gone. But before we get to that moment, before Rob Reiner said those haunting words to Billy, let's step back. Because you need to understand who these men were, and what they meant to each other. It began in the 1970s. Billy Crystal, young, sharp, funny, rising fast. Rob Reiner, already a household name, riding the wave of All in the Family as meathead, but itching to break out of acting and start directing. They met at a dinner party in LA, a chance meeting, the kind Hollywood stories are built on. Billy was doing stand-up for a small crowd of studio executives. Rob laughed harder than anyone. "You're going to be big," Rob said. "You're going to direct me," Billy shot back. "Deal." They shook on it. And in time, that promise turned into one of the greatest collaborations in film history. When Harry Met Sally, City Slickers, Forget Paris, even projects they didn't do together, one would still call the other for notes. They weren't just friends. They were creative soulmates. Vacations, birthdays, godparents to each other's children. If Billy was performing, Rob was in the front row. If Rob had a new script, Billy was the first to read it. But in the final years, the calls changed. They weren't about jokes or scripts anymore. They were darker, slower, more fragmented. He'd call me at 11 p.m. and say, "Can I talk to you?" Billy recalled. And he'd just sit in silence on the line, breathing heavy, like he was gathering the courage to speak. It was in one of those moments, just 6 months before the tragedy, that Rob first said the word, dream. Not nightmare. Dream. "I see it every other night," Rob said. "It's always the same. I wake up in the dream. Nick's there. He's crying, then screaming, then holding something, a knife. And Michelle's trying to run. But I can't move. I can't move." Billy told him he should see someone. Rob just said, "It's not a dream. It's a warning." And here's where things started to spiral. Because Rob wasn't just afraid of the dream. He started believing it was real. He told Billy the strangest thing. "I've started doing things in real life because of what I saw in the dream." What kind of things? He installed new locks on the bedroom door. He moved all the knives out of the kitchen drawers and hid them in a suitcase under the bed. He added cameras in the hallway. Without telling Nick, he kept a journal, not a diary, a record of every conversation he had with his son. It sounds crazy, Billy said in the interview. But when you saw Rob, the way he looked, you couldn't laugh it off. He looked like a man living after something had already happened. So how did they get here? How did a father who once carried his infant son on movie sets end up terrified of that same child? Let's talk about Nick Reiner. On paper, Nick was a Hollywood heir. Handsome, talented, writer, director. He even co-wrote the film Being Charlie, based loosely on his struggles with addiction, directed by his father. But insiders knew the truth. Nick was erratic, combative, paranoid. There were whispered stories, yelling fits on set, blown-up friendships, rehab stints that ended in late-night phone calls to Rob begging for help. He'd lash out, disappear, come back, and Rob always welcomed him with open arms. He was trying to save his son, said one close family friend. That was his tragedy. He couldn't give up on Nick, even when Nick scared the hell out of him. Billy remembered the turning point vividly. A barbecue at Rob's estate. The usual crowd. Producers, old friends, extended family. Nick showed up 2 hours late, clearly high, loud, unfiltered. At one point, he cornered Billy and said, "You think you know my dad? You don't. He's a liar. You all think he's this perfect guy? He's not. He ruined me." Billy was stunned. He told Rob afterward. And Rob just stared at the fire pit, quietly said, "I think he hates me." From that day forward, Billy says Rob never brought Nick around his friends again. But he didn't kick him out. He couldn't. He was still living in the guest house. Right there. Just down the stone path. 20 feet away. Imagine that. Living steps away from the person you feared the most. Night after night. Waiting. But Rob was still Rob. He kept going. He kept working. He kept pretending. He smiled for photos. He posted throwbacks on social media. He walked red carpets. All the while, his closest friend was watching him slowly unravel. Billy says Rob became obsessed with time. He'd check the locks 5 times. He'd call Michelle every hour when she was out. He'd ask me strange questions. If I died tomorrow, would you know what to do? Stuff like that. Billy thought he was having a mental health crisis. But Rob insisted, "I'm sane. I just know what's coming." And then, he asked Billy to do something. Something Billy would later come to regret more than anything. "If anything happens to me, don't let it become a tabloid story," Rob said. "Don't let them paint Nick as a monster. He's sick, but he's still my son." Billy promised. And that's why he stayed silent after the murders. "I was honoring his wishes," he said in the interview. "But it was eating me alive. Because I knew. This didn't come out of nowhere." Here's the twist. 3 weeks before the murders, Rob almost broke his silence. He called Billy at 2 a.m., out of breath, panicked. He said he saw Nick in the hallway, holding something. Rob said he locked the bedroom door, called security. But by the time they arrived, Nick was gone, passed out in the guest house. The next morning, Rob acted like it never happened. "I thought he was going to finally act," Billy recalled. "Move Nick out. Call someone. Do something." But instead, he cooked breakfast. Smiled. Asked about my grandkids. Billy was confused. "Why are you pretending?" he asked. Rob said, "Because I'm afraid if I confront him, that's when it will really happen." Billy paused in the interview. Tears welled up. He looked straight at the camera and said, "I should have done something. I should have called the police myself. I should have warned Michelle. But I didn't. Because I made a promise." Now here's the question. Was Rob truly prophetic? Or was he simply unraveling under the pressure of fear? That's what no one can fully answer. But the evidence, the patterns, the letters, the video logs Rob secretly kept, paint a chilling picture. He was scared. He was documenting. He knew. And the most horrifying part? Rob said he didn't just dream the attack once. He dreamed it 7 times. Each one slightly different. Each one more violent. Each one ending the same way. Silence, darkness, and blood on Nick's hands. Billy says he still hears Rob's voice sometimes when he tries to sleep. "You know that moment when your eyes are closed and you're about to drift off?" he said. "That's when I hear it." His voice, saying, "Promise me." And he did. Until now. Because what Billy didn't know, what no one knew, was that Rob had one final plan. One last insurance policy. A letter. 2 pages. mailed to Billy days before his death. It arrived the morning after the news broke. Stamped, signed, written in fear. And on the final line, after a chilling account of everything Rob had seen and feared, he added one final, mysterious name. Not Nick, not Michelle, not even Billy. Someone else. And what Billy did with that letter next would blow this entire case wide open. What would you do if your dreams started to predict real life? Not just once, not twice, but over and over again. Same setting, same ending, same face at the center of it all, your own child. Would you dismiss it as stress? Or would you believe that it was a warning? That was the question haunting Rob Reiner in the final year of his life. And if Billy Crystal's account is accurate, Rob didn't just have dreams. He had prophecies, because every detail in those nightmares mirrored what happened the night he died. It started innocently. A flicker, one dream, one strange, surreal moment Rob brushed off as anxiety. It was mid-2024. He was wrapping post-production on a documentary and sleeping erratically. Michelle was out of town visiting her sister. And that night, Rob jolted awake, drenched in sweat. The dream? Simple, but terrifying. He was in bed. The room was cold. The hallway lights flickered. A shadow appeared in the doorway. Then the figure stepped forward. It was Nick, tears in his eyes, breathing heavily. He said nothing, just raised something in his hand, metallic, sharp, glinting. Rob said he couldn't move, couldn't scream. The dream ended with the feeling of steel brushing against his throat. And then black. He told Billy about it the next day over coffee. They laughed. Kind of. Billy made a joke about eating spicy food too late. But Rob didn't laugh. It felt real, he told him. Not like a dream. Like a preview. Billy shrugged it off. It's a one-off. But Rob wasn't so sure. Because 2 nights later, it happened again. Same setup. Same room. Same flickering lights. But this time, Michelle was there. And she screamed. And that's when Rob started to spiral. He didn't go to a therapist. He didn't write it off. He documented it. That's the part no one expected. Rob Reiner, a man of logic, of reason, of film structure and storytelling, suddenly started treating his dreams like evidence. He kept a black leather notebook hidden in his office drawer labeled, Nick, Dreams in all caps. Billy didn't even know about it until after the murders. But inside, Rob wrote obsessively. Entries like, July 4th, saw Nick in doorway again. Knife was longer this time. Heard Michelle call my name. Woke up with throat sore. Coincidence? July 9th, woke up at 3:14. Same dream. Same hallway. This time, he smiled before stepping into the room. Smiled. July 18th, called Billy today. Didn't tell him it happened again. Didn't want to scare him. But the light flickered in the hallway before I went to bed. Same as in the dream. This wasn't just anxiety. It was obsession. And each dream got more detailed. More disturbing. In one, Rob claimed he felt himself dying. Not metaphorically. Literally. The coldness creeping into his limbs. The inability to speak. Michelle's hands slipping away as blood pooled between them. Billy wouldn't learn about this dream until much later. But when he did, he froze. Because every single one of those elements would later be confirmed by the coroner's report. The part that breaks your heart? Rob tried everything to stop the dreams. He changed his diet, meditated, burned sage, got security cameras installed, even though he never said why. He even moved the bed to the other side of the room. Still, they kept coming. And the strange part? The more they repeated, the more calm he became about them. That's what disturbed Billy the most. He stopped being scared, Billy said. He started sounding resigned. One call stood out in particular. A cold December morning. Rob was walking the estate's perimeter, breath fogging in the air, voice tired, slow. I think I'm being warned, he told Billy. And if I'm not, maybe it's better that I just prepare. I'm tired of fighting it. Billy didn't know what to say. What do you say to a man who believes he's already seen his own murder? And here's where it gets stranger. Rob started recording video logs. Not interviews. Not messages for the public. Private. Confidential. For Billy. He recorded them late at night. Sometimes whispering. Always starting the same way. If you're watching this, then it happened. Billy says he received 4 of these clips after Rob's death, sent to him on a USB drive hidden inside a hollowed-out book that was delivered by Rob's lawyer. Each one more haunting than the last. The final video? Recorded 2 nights before the murders. Rob looked exhausted. red eyes, his hair disheveled, voice barely audible. He stared directly into the camera and said, "I dreamed it again. But this time, I didn't wake up." Then silence. Was it paranoia? Was Rob suffering from delusions? Or was he seeing something no one else could? Billy has wrestled with that question every single day since. But there's one detail that haunts him above all. Because one dream entry, dated just 3 days before the murders, reads, "Nick said something this time. First time in any dream he ever spoke. Just one line. You never listened to me." That line would later be repeated, verbatim, during Nick's first police interrogation. Coincidence? Or something darker? Michelle, too, noticed something was wrong. She told her sister that Rob wasn't sleeping well, that he looked over his shoulder more often, that he triple-checked the locks every night, and that he started leaving lights on in the hallway, something he never did. She didn't understand why. She didn't know about the dreams. Because Rob never told her. He told Billy instead. And then came the most chilling dream of all. In this one, Rob said Billy was there. He was at the foot of the bed, trying to warn them, screaming, but his voice was muffled, like he was behind glass, like he was too late. Rob wrote in his journal that this was the first time he woke up crying, and it was the last entry before the attack. Billy broke down reading it. Because that final dream was almost identical to the crime scene layout as described in police reports. Rob and Michelle in bed, blood on the sheets, a figure standing at the doorway, lights flickering, and no sound, no alarm, no scream. He saw it coming, Billy whispered. He knew. On some level, he knew. Here's where things take a sharp left turn. Billy didn't just sit on this information. After the funeral, he quietly handed over the dream journal and the USB videos to a private investigator. And what the investigator found? Terrifying. He traced patterns in the dreams to real-life events. Dates matched days when Nick had outbursts. Locations in the dreams reflected rearranged furniture Rob never documented publicly. And in one video, Rob describes hearing footsteps on gravel outside his window at 3 a.m. Security footage from the same night shows a figure walking past that exact window, barefoot, at 2:59 a.m. The image is blurry, but the build, the gait, matches Nick. Billy wanted to believe it wasn't real, that maybe it was all a tragic, symbolic coincidence. But the evidence? Overwhelming. Rob didn't just dream his death. He recorded it, mapped it, prepared for it. And yet, he never left. Why? Why stay in a house you believe you'll die in? Why sleep beside your wife, knowing what's coming? Why keep your best friend silent? Billy only has one answer. Because he loved Nick. And because he believed, deep down, that maybe, just maybe, he could stop him. That belief, however misguided, cost Rob and Michelle their lives. And it left Billy with a guilt no one should have to carry. But he's not staying silent anymore. Because there's something else buried in those dreams. A detail Rob never explained. In one dream, Nick wasn't alone. A second figure, at the edge of the hallway, watching, smiling. And in the journal, Rob writes just one line about it. He wasn't acting alone. I'm sure of it now. So who was that second figure? A hallucination? A metaphor? Or something real? And if so, who were they? Because when Billy followed the clues in Rob's journal, he found a name. And not just any name. It was someone still alive, still powerful, still close to the family. And what came next would crack the investigation wide open. What if the warning signs were always there? Not hidden, not subtle, just ignored. Because when people talk about Nick Reiner now, they ask the same question over and over again. How did no one see this coming? But the truth is harder to swallow. They did see it. They just didn't want to name it. Nick Reiner grew up surrounded by privilege, praise, and protection. Famous father, wealthy household, Hollywood doors opening before he even knocked. From the outside, it looked like a dream childhood. From the inside, according to those who knew him, it was chaos wrapped in opportunity. Billy Crystal said something chilling during his private interview. Nick never learned consequences. And when you remove consequences from a volatile person, you create something dangerous. Nick was brilliant when he wanted to be. Sharp, articulate, creatively gifted. But he was also explosive. Mood swings, sudden rages, periods of deep charm followed by weeks of isolation. People close to the family say Rob spent most of Nick's adult life cleaning up messes no one ever heard about. Arguments with producers, threats made in anger, Rehab visits quietly arranged. Each time, Rob stepped in. Each time, Nick came back. And each time, he came back angrier. Let's talk about the first incident Billy says still haunts him. It happened years before the murders. A small private screening. Industry friends. Quiet night. Nick arrived late. Already agitated. Someone made an offhand comment about his work. Nick snapped. Not yelling. Not screaming. Something colder. He leaned in and whispered something so disturbing that the room went silent. Billy never repeated the words publicly, but he did say this. That was the first moment I thought, this kid is not okay. Rob smoothed it over, laughed it off, apologized for Nick. Afterward, Billy pulled Rob aside. You can't keep excusing this, he said. Rob replied quietly. If I don't protect him, who will? That sentence would echo for years. Nick's struggles with addiction were no secret inside the family. Rehab stints were framed as retreats. Relapses were described as stress. And Rob believed love could fix anything. But love, unchecked, can become denial. And denial can become danger. Nick resented his father. Not because Rob was absent, but because Rob was everywhere. Every success Nick had was filtered through one sentence. He's Rob Reiner's son. Nick hated that sentence. He hated the comparisons. He hated the expectations. And most of all, he hated feeling powerless. Friends say Nick would spiral whenever he felt controlled. Money, rules, boundaries, anything that reminded him he wasn't in charge. And guess what started happening in the year before the murders? Rob began setting boundaries. It started with finances. Nick's allowance was reduced. Then came conditions. Therapy, sobriety, accountability. Rob wanted Nick out of the guest house. Not kicked out, just independent. Nick saw it as betrayal. And according to Billy, Nick said something chilling during one argument. You think you can cut me off? You think I won't burn this whole place down? Rob told Billy about that line later. Billy asked him if Nick meant it literally. Rob didn't answer. Here's the contradiction that messes with everyone. Nick could be loving, tender, regretful. He'd cry, apologize, hug his parents. Michelle especially believed he could change. She always saw the little boy, Billy said, not the man he was becoming. That made everything harder. Because when someone is only cruel all the time, the threat is obvious. But when cruelty comes in waves, followed by remorse, it traps people. Rob and Michelle were trapped. Nick's anger didn't just show up at home. It followed him into his work. Projects collapsed. Deals vanished. People stopped returning calls. And every failure reinforced the story in Nick's head. My father ruined my life. That belief became obsession. Billy says Rob once confided. Nick thinks I'm the villain in his story. Imagine hearing that from a man who devoted his life to protecting his child. Then came the incident that changed everything. 3 months before the murders. Nick had a violent outburst. Details remained sealed, but Rob was shaken enough to call Billy immediately afterward. His voice was different. Not scared. Resolved. I'm changing my will, Rob said. Billy asked why. Rob said, because I'm afraid of what happens if I don't. That sentence landed like a bomb. Billy urged him to tell Michelle. Rob said he would, but he never did. And here's the most disturbing part. Nick somehow found out. No one knows how. But within days, Nick confronted Rob. According to Rob's journal, the argument was explosive. Nick accused Rob of planning to erase him. Nick screamed that everything was being taken away. And then he said something Rob never forgot. If you try to control me, you'll regret it. Rob wrote that line down, circled it, underlined it twice. After that argument, the dreams intensified. That's when Rob started locking the bedroom door. That's when Michelle started sleeping with the lights on. That's when Billy noticed Rob losing weight. And that's when Nick's behavior grew darker. He stopped pretending. He stopped apologizing. He walked the property at night. He muttered to himself. He stared at the house from the guest house porch for hours. Neighbors noticed. Security footage noticed. But no one intervened. Why? Because of who Rob Reiner was. Because of who Nick Reiner was. Because people assumed, they'll handle it. Billy didn't know how bad it had gotten until after the murders. When he spoke to the investigator. When he read the full journal. When he saw messages Nick had sent, never shared publicly. Messages that read like accusations. Threats. Ultimatums. And then, silence. Here's the question you need to ask yourself. How many warning signs does it take before responsibility shifts? When does love become enabling? When does silence become participation? Billy Crystal asks himself those questions every day because he remembers the last time he saw Nick. At the funeral, Nick didn't cry. He didn't collapse. He didn't look broken. He looked empty. Billy said their eyes met for just a second. And in that second, Billy felt something he couldn't explain. Not fear. Recognition. As if Nick knew Billy knew. And as if that knowledge didn't bother him at all. But this chapter doesn't end here. Because Nick's troubled history wasn't just emotional. It wasn't just psychological. There were incidents, quietly buried, where Nick crossed lines that should never be crossed. Incidents Rob paid to make disappear. Incidents that suggest Nick's violence didn't start that night. And one of those incidents? It happened years earlier. Involved a knife. And was never reported. Until now. Because when investigators reopened old records, they found something they weren't supposed to find. A report. A name. A pattern. And suddenly, Rob's dreams didn't look so abstract anymore. They looked like memory. And what came next would reframe Nick Reiner. Not as a man who snapped, but as someone who had been escalating all along. What happens when fear doesn't explode, but settles? Not a scream. Not a fight. Just a slow, heavy pressure that sinks into the walls of a house and refuses to leave. That's what the Brentwood estate became in the final months of Rob and Michelle Reiner's lives. A beautiful property, immaculate landscaping, sunlight pouring through glass doors, and underneath it all, unease, silence, a feeling that something was wrong, but no one could quite say it out loud. People assume tension announces itself. Raised voices, slamming doors, police calls. But inside that house, the tension was quieter than that. It lived in pauses, in unfinished sentences, in the way Michelle started locking doors she'd never locked before. Billy Crystal didn't see most of it firsthand. He heard it, in Rob's voice, in the way conversations drifted, stalled, then restarted somewhere else entirely. He'd call me and ask about nothing, Billy said later. The weather, a movie, a joke. But you could tell, he was calling because he didn't want to be alone with his thoughts. Rob stopped inviting people over. The dinners ended. The laughter faded. The estate, once alive with guests and noise, became controlled, contained. And the reason sat 20 steps away. In the guest house. Nick. Living arrangements matter. That's something investigators understand well. Because proximity changes everything. Nick wasn't across town. He wasn't in another state. He was right there. Close enough to hear doors open. Close enough to see lights turn off. Close enough to walk the path between buildings in under 30 seconds. Rob told Billy he could hear Nick pacing at night. Not every night, but enough. I'll hear footsteps on the gravel, Rob said once. And I'll just lie there, counting them. Michelle tried to normalize it. He's restless, she said. He's trying to get better. She believed that. She wanted to believe that. But belief doesn't erase instinct. And Michelle's instincts were changing. Friends noticed the shift in her. She became quieter, more guarded. She stopped sharing details about home life. And when asked directly how things were going, she'd smile and say, "Fine," then change the subject. That's a defense mechanism. One many people use when the truth feels too complicated or too frightening to explain. Rob began modifying the house in small, almost invisible ways. A new lock here. A camera angle adjusted there. He didn't announce it. He didn't explain it. He just did it. The hallway light stayed on all night. The bedroom door stayed closed. And every night before bed, Rob checked the perimeter. Billy asked him why once. Rob replied, "Because if I don't, I won't sleep." Here's the contradiction no one likes to talk about. Despite the fear, Rob didn't confront Nick. Not directly. Not in the way people expect. He avoided escalation. Because he believed, right or wrong, that confrontation would trigger something irreversible. So instead, he tried distance. Rules. Schedules. Boundaries. And boundaries, to someone already feeling cornered, can feel like attacks. Nick noticed everything. The locks. The cameras. The changes. And according to Rob's journal, Nick mocked them. He laughed. He asked, "What are you scared of?" That question alone chilled Rob. Because it wasn't curiosity. It was challenge. The estate staff sensed it too. Housekeepers requested schedule changes. One groundskeeper asked to be reassigned. No one wanted to say why, but the reasons were always vague. Uncomfortable. Awkward. Energy's off. Those words show up again and again in private statements. Energy doesn't lie. There was one night, never reported publicly, that stands out. Rob told Billy about it weeks later. It was late. After midnight. Michelle was asleep. Rob heard a sound near the bedroom door. Not footsteps. Breathing. He held still. Listened. Then silence. In the morning, nothing appeared disturbed. But Rob found something odd. The hallway light burned out. That bulb had been replaced days earlier. Rob wrote in his journal, "Either I'm losing my mind, or someone stood there long enough for it to overheat." Billy begged him to stay somewhere else. A hotel. A friend's house. Rob refused. "If I leave," he said, "I'm admitting I'm afraid. And if Nick senses that, I don't know what he'll do." Fear layered on fear. Silence layered on silence. Michelle tried to bring normalcy back. She hosted a small brunch. Just a few friends. Nick didn't attend. He stayed in the guest house, watching from the window. Several guests noticed. One even asked quietly, "Is he okay?" Michelle smiled. "He's just tired." But later that night, Michelle told her sister something different. She said, "I don't feel safe when he's angry." That sentence matters, because it was the first time she ever acknowledged fear aloud. Rob overheard part of that conversation. He didn't interrupt. But later, he told Billy, "I never wanted Michelle to be afraid in her own home. That's my failure." Billy asked him what he planned to do. Rob said he was working on something. He didn't explain. Here's where the timeline tightens. 3 days before the murders, the tension peaked. There was an argument. Not explosive, contained, but sharp. According to Rob's notes, Nick demanded access to money Rob had frozen. Rob refused. Nick accused him of punishment, control, manipulation. Michelle intervened. Nick turned on her. Not physically, verbally. Said things that cannot be unheard. Rob wrote one line about that exchange. Just one. "He crossed a line tonight. I don't know how to come back from it." After that, Rob slept with his phone beside him. Ringer on. That alone tells you everything. Neighbors reported seeing lights on all night at the main house. Security logs show multiple door checks between midnight and dawn. The cameras, some of them, glitched. Just briefly, but long enough to leave gaps. No one knows why. Technical issue? Power fluctuation? Or something else? Billy didn't know most of this until after the fact. When he read the journal. When he spoke to the investigator. When the picture formed. He said something chilling in a follow-up interview. That house wasn't a home anymore. It was a waiting room. Waiting for what? That's the question. Michelle made one final attempt to fix things. She suggested family counseling. Nick refused. She suggested space. Nick accused her of turning Rob against him. And that night, Michelle packed a small bag. Not to leave. Just in case. She put it in the closet. Rob saw it. He didn't ask about it. But he wrote this. "I think she's preparing for something too." People like to imagine tragedies as sudden. They're rarely sudden. They're layered. Built. Ignored. This was not a house where violence appeared out of nowhere. This was a house where tension was allowed to breathe, grow, expand, until it filled every room. And yet, despite all of it, Rob still believed there was time. Time to fix things. Time to intervene. Time to save his son from himself. That belief may have been his greatest strength. Or his fatal flaw. Because what Rob didn't know, what no one in that house knew, was that the situation had already moved beyond tension, beyond fear, into preparation. And the evidence for that? It wasn't found in the main house. It was found in the guest house. Hidden, quiet, waiting. And when investigators finally crossed that short stone path, they realized the danger hadn't been imaginary at all. It had been building, step by step, right there the entire time. What if the moment everything breaks doesn't feel like a disaster? What if it feels inevitable? That's what investigators now believe about the final days inside the Reiner estate. Because while the public saw a sudden, shocking double homicide, those closest to Rob and Michelle knew something had snapped just days before the fatal night. And that snap didn't sound like screaming. It sounded like silence. It started with money. At least, that's what they fought about on the surface. Nick had grown increasingly desperate. His film projects had stalled. The industry had stopped returning his calls. His inheritance, once assumed to be endless, was no longer guaranteed. Why? Because Rob had finally done the one thing Nick feared most. He drew a line. We now know that Rob Reiner, just weeks before the murders, met with his estate attorney to revise his will. His instructions were clear. Nick would no longer receive direct control of any future assets. Instead, the funds would be placed in a trust managed by a third party. Conditions were added: mental health reviews, financial oversight, independent arbitration before any major withdrawals. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't a punishment. It was protection. But to Nick, it was betrayal. Billy Crystal recalled a phone call from Rob just after that decision. "I finally did it," Rob said. "And I'm terrified he's going to find out." He did. Not through lawyers. Not through paperwork. But through behavior. Because Nick sensed it. He noticed Michelle whispering more. He noticed Rob locking drawers that used to be left open. He noticed the air had changed. And when the confrontation came, it didn't happen in the courtroom. It happened in the kitchen. Sunday morning, 2 days before the murders. Rob was making eggs. Michelle reading the paper. Nick walked in, calm at first. Tense, but quiet. He asked a question, according to Rob's final journal entry. "So, when were you going to tell me?" Rob didn't play dumb. He told Nick the truth. He said he was worried about his behavior. That the trust wasn't a punishment, it was a responsibility. That if Nick got help, kept sober, stayed on track, he'd have access. But Nick wasn't listening. He was boiling. He accused Rob of abandonment, of manipulation, of turning Michelle against him. He said things that have not been publicly released, but reportedly reduced Michelle to tears. The housekeeper on duty that day told police the shouting was unlike anything she'd ever heard. She left early, didn't come back. Billy later confirmed that Rob called him that evening. Voice low, shaken. "He hates me," Rob said. "He said if I take one more thing from him, he'll take everything from me." Billy begged him to leave the house. Go to Malibu. Stay with friends. Call security. Do something. But Rob refused. "If I run now, I'll never stop running." Here's where the story takes a darker turn. Because the next morning, Monday, the estate's main security system experienced a temporary outage. 10 minutes. Then it rebooted. Glitch? Power surge? Maybe. But the cameras facing the path between the guest house and the main house, those were the ones that went dark. Billy was never told that detail. Not until months later. Back to that Sunday night. Dinner was quiet. Too quiet. Michelle cooked. Rob didn't eat. Nick stayed in the guest house. But at one point, just before midnight, he walked across the stone path and entered the main house. The security log shows the door opened at 11:47 p.m. It stayed open for 16 minutes. Then closed. No one knows what was said. No one knows what happened. But afterward, Rob made one final journal entry. "This is the turning point. I can feel it. I saw it in his eyes. I just hope I'm wrong." That was the last thing he ever wrote. Billy saw the entry when the police returned Rob's belongings. He read it twice, 3 times, then dropped the notebook and cried for 10 straight minutes. "I could have done more," he said later. "But Rob made me promise not to get involved. And I honored that. And now he's gone. The timeline gets murky from here. But what we do know is this. On Monday, the day of the murders, Nick left the property once. He visited a hardware store. Bought nothing. Stayed for 9 minutes. Security footage shows him browsing, looking at blades. He left empty-handed. He returned to the estate by 2:13 p.m. After that, no movement was recorded from the guest house. Until 3:41 a.m. Now here's where the tragedy comes into focus. Because Michelle made a phone call to her sister around 9 p.m. that night. Short, quiet. She said, "We're okay. It was just a misunderstanding. He's calmed down now." That was her final call. Investigators now believe she was trying to de-escalate, trying to smooth things over, trying to believe, like Rob did, that love would fix it. But love doesn't fix rage. Love doesn't stop a plan that's already in motion. And by then, it was in motion. The family dog, a golden retriever named Max, was found locked in the laundry room the next morning. He never barked. Someone put him there. Deliberately. Why? So he wouldn't alert Rob and Michelle. This wasn't impulsive. It was premeditated. Billy was notified of the deaths at 6:42 a.m. the next day. He collapsed. At first, he thought it was a joke, a prank, a mistake. Then came the details. The scene, the knife wounds, the lack of forced entry, the missing surveillance footage. And Nick, found alone in the guest house. Awake, sitting, covered in blood. What happened between 3:41 a.m. and 4:03 a.m.? The estimated time of death will never be fully understood. But here's what haunts Billy the most. Nick didn't run, didn't flee, didn't deny. He simply said, "They always knew this would happen." That quote was redacted from early police statements, only surfaced later during discovery. And when Billy read it, he broke down. Because he was right, he whispered. Rob did know. The final argument was never resolved. Because it was never meant to be. To Nick, it wasn't a conversation. It was a confrontation, a threat, a verdict. And in his mind, he passed sentence. Rob spent his life creating stories. He understood structure, setup, conflict, resolution. But real life doesn't always follow arcs. Sometimes it ends mid-scene. And in this case, it ended in silence. In a house filled with memories. On a night that felt, according to Billy, like the closing scene Rob feared he'd one day direct. There's one final moment you need to know. The coroner's report noted something odd. Rob was found holding something in his hand. Not tightly, just lightly gripped between his fingers. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a phone. It was a photograph of Nick, age 7, on a movie set, laughing, covered in ice cream. That detail shattered Billy. Because even in his final moments, Rob wasn't thinking about revenge or anger. He was thinking about love, a love that couldn't save him, but a love that never let go. But what investigators found next, in Nick's guest house, rewrote everything. Because hidden inside a drawer, behind a false panel, was a set of items that proved this wasn't just emotional. It was planned, and someone might have helped him do it. What would you say if you knew your life was about to end? Not in theory, not metaphorically, but literally. What would your final message be? Rob Reiner answered that question in 2 pages. 2 pages that would remain hidden for weeks after his death. 2 pages that would shatter Billy Crystal. 2 pages that would raise more questions than they answered. The letter didn't come from a lawyer. It didn't come through official channels. It was hand-delivered by a woman in her early 60s, dressed in a simple gray jacket, sunglasses, and clutching a worn manila envelope. She arrived at Billy Crystal's home in Pacific Palisades just after noon. No media, no handlers, no entourage, just a quiet knock at the door. When Billy opened it, she said 4 words. "Rob wanted you to have this." Then she walked away. He never saw her again. Inside the envelope, 2 sheets of paper. One typed, one handwritten. No heading, no date. Just, Rob. His voice on paper. And what he wrote wasn't just a goodbye. It was a confession, a warning, and a plea. Billy didn't open the envelope right away. He said later, "I think part of me knew what was inside, and I wasn't ready." He left it on his desk for nearly an hour. Paced the room, made coffee, finally sat down, opened the flap, read the first page, and broke. Let's break down what the letter contained. Page 1, typed. Rob lays out his state of mind. He describes his dreams, his escalating fear, the feeling that something terrible is coming, and no one will believe me until it's too late. He mentions Nick, by name, multiple times. Not with anger, with heartbreak. "He's not a monster," Rob wrote. "He's my son, and I love him, but I'm afraid of what he's becoming. And I'm afraid that loving him isn't enough anymore." He describes the arguments, the surveillance glitches, the strange behavior, the voice he heard at night outside the door. He writes, "If you're reading this, something happened, and I just hope to God I'm wrong." He wasn't. But page 2, that's where things turn dark. Page 2, handwritten. It's more erratic. Messier, scribbled in a shaky hand. This isn't the Rob Reiner the world knew, the confident filmmaker, the sharp wit, the composed storyteller. This is a man unraveling, panicked, desperate. Rob writes, "There's more to this, more than I've told even you. I swore I wouldn't say anything. But now I think silence is worse." He never says who made him swear. But then comes the bombshell. He names someone. Not Nick. Another name. A person no one expected. Billy hasn't revealed that name publicly. Not yet. He's been advised not to, for now. But he's hinted. And from what sources close to the investigation say, that name is tied to a second conspiracy. Back to the letter. Rob continues. He knew. He encouraged it. Maybe not directly, but he made it okay. And I think Nick needed that. Who is he? That's the central mystery. A friend? A business partner? Someone close to the family? Whoever it is, Rob believed this person played a role. Maybe not in the act itself, but in fueling it. And that brings up the unthinkable. Was this planned? Was it more than a son's rage? Was it assisted? Billy handed the letter over to investigators immediately. It was sealed into evidence within hours, but its contents, particularly the name, sent shockwaves through the team. Because it wasn't a stranger. It wasn't some shadowy outsider. It was someone connected, close, trusted, and that changed everything. Let's rewind. After the murders, everyone assumed motive. Personal, emotional, financial. But with the letter, the case began to shift. The search expanded. Investigators re-examined emails, phone logs, financial records. And that's when they found it. A transfer. Unusual. Large. From one of Nick's accounts to an offshore entity. Exactly 1 week before the murders. The amount? $48,000. Not massive by Reiner family standards, but suspicious, especially when traced back to an associate of the man named in Rob's letter. Who is this man? Billy won't say. Not yet. But he did say this. When I saw the name, I felt sick. Because I knew him. I'd had dinner with him. I'd laughed with him. And now, he trails off. No follow-up. No closure. Just the weight of realization. Here's another strange detail. Rob sealed the letter inside a book. A hollowed-out copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. Why that book? Some think it was symbolic. The story of justice. Of truth. Of protecting innocence in the face of corruption. Rob loved that novel. He even quoted it once during an old interview. Atticus says the one thing that doesn't abide by majority rule is a person's conscience. I think about that line all the time. That's what Billy remembered when he opened the cover and saw the folded envelope inside. Rob was trying to speak from beyond the grave. And he did. But one thing haunts Billy still. A line at the bottom of page 2. Written hastily. Almost like an afterthought. There's something in the safe. That was it. No explanation. No location. Just that phrase. And the safe? Wasn't found until 2 weeks later. It was in the guest house. Hidden beneath a false floorboard. Small. Rusted. Unmarked. Inside, a USB drive. And a journal. Not Rob's. Nick's. And what it contained would devastate Billy and confirm Rob's darkest fears. Because in Nick's own words, written in bursts over months, investigators found fragments of thought, rage, envy, delusions, paranoia, and one chilling sentence, repeated in various forms. He took everything from me, so I'll take it all back. But the most terrifying entry? A list. No title, no date, just a list of names. Rob, Michelle, Billy, 2 others. Redacted. Was it a threat? A fantasy? Or a plan? No one knows for sure. But that list, combined with Rob's letter, changed the case entirely. Billy reads the letter every week now. Not because he wants to. Because he has to. Because it reminds him that friendship isn't always enough. That silence isn't always protection. And that sometimes, when your best friend whispers, "Promise me," you have to break that promise. To honor the man he was. But the letter wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Because it opened a trail. And what investigators found next, in Rob's voicemails, confirmed that the name he wrote down wasn't paranoia. It was evidence. Evidence that someone knew. Someone who could have stopped it. And chose not to. What happens in the final hours of a man's life? Not in a hospital. Not in a movie. But in real time. When the camera stops rolling. When no one is watching. That's the question that now haunts investigators, family, and, most of all, Billy Crystal. Because the night Rob and Michelle Reiner were murdered wasn't chaos. It was quiet. Unsettlingly quiet. No alarms. No calls to 911. No struggle loud enough to wake neighbors. And yet, by morning, both of them were gone. Let's rewind the clock. Sunday, 7:03 p.m. Michelle texts her sister. Just finished dinner. We're okay. Love you. 7:26 p.m. Housekeeper clocks out. Reports no signs of conflict. Everything appears normal. 8:11 p.m. Rob checks the perimeter. This is routine. Documented dozens of times in his journal. Nothing unusual appears on the security log. But investigators would later find something strange. A shadowy figure appears on the farthest exterior camera, just for one frame. Low to the ground. Moving quickly. Indistinct. It's dismissed by LAPD as an animal. But Rob's private investigator, hired months prior, disagrees. It was too smooth. Too coordinated. That wasn't a coyote. That was someone. 9:17 p.m. Nick is seen exiting the guest house. He doesn't return until after 10 p.m. Where he goes is still disputed. He told police he went for a walk. No one has confirmed that alibi. No street cameras captured him outside the estate's grounds. What is clear? When he returned, he entered the main house for exactly 4 minutes. 10:06 p.m. to 10:10 p.m. Door log confirms entry. What happened in that window? Rob's final voicemails offer a clue. Billy Crystal received a missed call at 10:14 p.m. No message. But shortly after, another call went to Rob's attorney. That time, a voicemail was left. You're about to hear pieces of that message, previously unreleased. The voice is low, calm, measured, but beneath the surface, tension, sadness, finality. Hey, it's me. I think tonight's the night. I feel it. I just wanted you to know the documents are in the cabinet. Tell Billy I'm sorry I lied. I thought I had more time. Click. That was it. Rob never called again. 11:45 p.m. The hallway camera in the main house malfunctions. Goes black for 7 minutes. The same camera that watches the master bedroom door. 11:52 p.m. A backdoor sensor is triggered. It's never opened. Just touched. And then, silence. At 12:03 a.m., a single hallway light goes off. This is the moment experts believe Nick made entry. No forced door. No broken glass. Why? Because he had a key. And investigators believe he waited. In the hallway. In the dark. For 34 minutes. 12:37 a.m. Rob's smartwatch detects sudden movement. Heart rate spikes. Then drops. Permanently. Medical examiners later confirm. Time of death. Between 12:36 and 12:43 a.m. The method? Multiple sharp force injuries. Wounds on hands indicate defensive actions. But only from Rob. Michelle, tragically, appears to have been attacked in her sleep. There's something else, something almost too cinematic to believe. When investigators arrived at the scene, they found music playing. A soft piano instrumental. Looped on a smart speaker. The track? The Way We Were by Marvin Hamlish. One of Rob and Michelle's favorites. But here's the catch. The speaker system requires manual activation, and neither Rob nor Michelle were seen interacting with it. Was it Nick? If so, why? Was it mockery? Regret? Or was it his twisted idea of saying goodbye? Nick was discovered at 4:19 a.m. by LAPD, sitting on the floor of the guest house. Hands stained, shirt off, eyes unfocused. The arresting officer asked him if he was okay. Nick responded, "It's over now, isn't it?" But what really shocks people is what he said next. When asked why he did it, he didn't deny it. He didn't cry. He said, "I warned them. I said not to choose money over me." That line shattered Billy Crystal. Because Rob had told him, months earlier, "I'm afraid Nick thinks this is a battle between love and control. And if I draw a line, he'll think I've stopped loving him." Billy remembers that word, line, and how Rob crossed it just days before. Let's revisit the scene. Investigators later released key details. No signs of forced entry. No evidence of a struggle outside the bedroom. No weapons recovered. Until 5 days later. Where was the knife? Buried. Under the floorboards of the guest house bathroom. Wrapped in 2 layers of plastic. Cleaned, partially. But blood traces were still found. DNA? Matched to both victims. And the prints? Smudged. But one partial match belonged to someone else. Not Nick. A second person, still unidentified. This is where things turn from tragedy to conspiracy, because the letter Rob left behind named someone. And now, forensics suggested someone besides Nick had touched the weapon. Billy said it best. Nick may have held the knife, but I don't think he sharpened it alone. There's more. 2:07 a.m. Security cam from the northeast fence line picks up brief motion. A figure tall, hooded, gone in seconds. No entry detected. No exit found. But that camera? It's outside the estate. Was someone watching? Was someone waiting? Or, worse, was someone helping? Let's not forget the safe. The USB stick. Nick's journal. The list of names. And among them, the same name Rob had written in his final letter to Billy. That can't be coincidence. That's intent. That's design. Back in the guest house, police also recovered a torn page from an old screenplay Nick had been working on. Written in shaky pen across the margin. Final scene. Father learns too late. Fade to black. What was that? A script note? Or a confession? When Billy Crystal visited the scene weeks later, Escorted quietly by LAPD, he stood in Rob's office. The chair untouched, the mug still on the desk. He looked at the bookshelf and found the hollowed-out To Kill a Mockingbird, the place where Rob had hidden the letter. He sat down, took a breath, and whispered, "I should have made you leave, Rob. I should have broken the promise. But regret doesn't raise the dead, and grief doesn't erase the questions. Because this wasn't just a murder. This was a message. One investigators are still trying to decode, and the next piece of that message would be delivered by the last person anyone expected. Because when Billy thought the worst was behind him, a private voicemail, left the morning after the murder, arrived at his phone from a blocked number, and the voice on the other end said his name, then whispered, "You don't know everything."